to Drummers Only Radio. Drummers Only is the UK's leading drum shop with store locations in Glasgow and Leeds. Our podcasts are full of interviews, gear reviews, and much more from the unique perspective of a drum shop. The show is hosted by two pasty Scottish dudes who talk real fast. Whoa, slow down there, Braveheart. So here's Chris, the Glasgow shop manager, and Adam, the social media manager. Be sure to like, subscribe, and let's do this.
Good evening, everybody, or good afternoon, or good morning, whatever time of day you're listening. Welcome again to Drummers Only Radio. This is episode number 57. And I am here with a wonderful Instagram personality and very much more, Mr. Tim Baltes. Baltes, is that how you say it?
Baltes, yeah, Baltes.
Baltes. Sorry, I should have asked you beforehand.
No worries.
With his wonderful Instagram handle, Timbo from Kino. You may have seen him floating around the internet. How are you, Tim?
Doing well. How you doing?
I'm good, man. I'm good. Thanks so much for coming on. If you don't know who Tim is, he's quite a big deal. In the drumming world, he's played on he's played on tracks from Disney, Zynga, 21st Century Fox, Warner Canada. You work for PASS?
So I'm a committee member for the Percussive Arts Society too. Yep.
Amazing. He has his own drumless tracks that are available that he creates. He's also a digital marketing consultant and has done lots of work for some pretty rad drum stores and stuff in the States. So we should have some good things, some different things to talk about today, Manny.
I hope so. I guess we'll find out.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's like tons of strings to the bow, right? That's a lot to be able to do. Not everybody can do the things that you do. So how did you get yourself into all these positions where you can do all these things, man?
Well, I had that basis in music. I've been playing music since I was 8 years old. I've been a drummer since I was 15. And after that, I went to college for business writing. Mm-hmm. And that blossomed into a corporate copywriting career and technical editing, which is basically making instructions more usable. and so, there was this time where it's like, how do I bridge all of these skill sets? And Instagram was really the tool for that for me. So I built my personal brand, and I was able to sell a bunch of drumless tracks, which then became a marketing effort all in and of itself. Taught a bunch of people, connected with some of these retail shops, and then what worked for me, I was able to use to help other folks. And using that creative spark that I bring from the copywriting world and from the music world, and just applying it to these other situations, whether it's helping Revival Drum Shop figure out how to market Jose's Stoic Drummer book. Or most recently now I'm working with Twin Cities Drum Collective up in Minneapolis on some different retail operations things, or product development with Franklin Drums up in Minneapolis too. So there's plenty of brands that I've been working with, and some of that comes from being a drummer and then working in a drum shop during college, and then having gone to college and studied all of these marketing things, and then having put those marketing things into practice with my personal brand and my friends as time went on.
It's so cool. It's so rad. Like I've seen through the years of working in stores how certain brands in the industry will employ marketing people that have no idea what the products are they're selling. They've come from a marketing background, but they might have sold medical products or beauty products or watches, or do you know what I mean? And the focus is maybe not necessarily where it should be for selling the product. So for you, I guess being a drummer, that must change all of that.
That's what's really interesting. Yeah. And we see this everywhere, is that whether you're in guitars or drums or anything else, DW recently hired a chief marketing officer that came from consumer products. And I think he even worked for Coca-Cola at one point. I don't know if you saw, but I had vied for their social media.
I did see that. Yeah.
That was crazy, dude. They posted, I've never seen a company do this before, but they made a little video advertising the social media manager position that they were trying to hire for. And I put it in my story. I just said, hey, if you got a few minutes, would you say a few kind words about me on this post? I was thinking, 20, 30 people maybe say something nice. 500 different people commented on that post. It was
amazing.
Nuts. So, if that wasn't a wild stunt, I don't know what is. But despite me having done that, despite me having reached out to their VPs through different professional channels that I have, unfortunately, I wasn't the right fit for them because they were looking for something else. And after the first round of interviews, it seems like they might be looking for someone from CPG, consumer products. And that's everywhere at all the top levels of the industry, where you're talking about drums, cymbals, or any other sector of MI. In my opinion, I think you can treat some larger companies, the monoliths like CPG, because they're such big names that, it's really not, as long as you don't royally screw up your marketing efforts, that company's going to keep floating by, and it's probably going to keep, soaring. When you get to these medium-sized companies, these smaller, very small companies, that's when I think it's even more paramount that you bring in someone who understands drums and drum business to really, really try to bolster whatever efforts you're trying to do, sales, marketing, anything else.
Yeah, I guess these medium and smaller companies have different, it's not responsibilities, it's priorities is maybe the word I'm thinking about how they have to market themselves. If you have a massive brand name, like you say, it's always going to sustain, isn't it? Because I believe Zildjian put someone in the top who came from, was he at Gillette razors?
I think he was. I know he did Ocean Spray. John did Ocean Spray, and probably Gillette too.
It's not about the Cymbals at that point, I don't think, is it? Because the product's kind of doing its own job.
Yeah, Zildjian's a really interesting company to study, because now we have a company that's literally maturing into its 400th year of operation.
Yeah.
It's insane.
Yeah.
And I've been fortunate to connect with a lot of the folks up there. They have folks from CPG, but they, thank goodness, especially at the front line, they have one really great social media manager who comes from drums. She worked in drum retail, particularly the marketing side of it. And so there's a lot of experience there that helps guide some of what they're doing. Like I said, on the front lines, I think it's most important on the front lines, community management and stuff like that, when you're actually having someone from the company talk to someone else about drums. But yeah, when you get further up to the top, it's a business. And with that maturation that we're talking about here, then, when you're a 400-year-old company, you got to start figuring out, well, do we just sell cymbals forever? There's a pivot point that can come. Marshall Amplifiers is a perfect example over in the UK. After Jim passed away, I believe it was his widow then took over the company. Over in stateside here, sooner than later, they had displays in every Best Buy electronics store selling those little Bluetooth speakers that were some of the first to market, and they were from Marshall. So, there's a pivot there that can take a company and, add a healthy chunk of money to revenue if you're able to pivot like that. And I think a CPG mindset can really help there. Yes. We see Zildjian's dabbling in that. Did you see they just released like some spray painted hats and some art and stuff, like super funky stuff. And, I think it's trying some of these super off the wall ideas that will help inform where that company is going in the future. So that's going to be a real interesting company to watch over the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, I think especially after coming out of pandemic, when sales would have dropped basically instantly, you're having to furlough your workforce and, your production. I mean, Remo's production's still at half capacity, I believe. So there's so many of these things that need that mindset to change it, in order to grow revenue, to keep going, so that we keep getting cymbals, so that we can keep getting them over here, getting them in China, getting them wherever they need to go to. It's fascinating stuff, man. It's funny how it all plays down to even a local level, how those decisions will affect us, which will then affect the consumer, And I think you're right about people on the front line being able to talk drums, because this community as a whole is too big and too niche for you to try and get it, to try and blag it, to try and sort of bullshit your way through it. You're just going to get caught out, you're going to get caught out. Like, we'll talk probably later about vintage drums, and I remember one of the first times when I was new staff here, I've been here for 15 years, basically on and off now, trying to sort of kind of blag my way through vintage drums with someone who's just like, nah man, that's not true at all. And you just can't get caught out with these guys, Drummers know too much.
Oh, 100%. Like I was saying earlier, I worked used music retail for the 5 years I was in college. And, I can sell a Tom a Rockstar or a Pearl Vision kit all day, and hey, it's a drum. Here's a drum that you can
Yeah.
use. But I had to dive into. I'm located between Milwaukee and Chicago,
Okay.
and Chicago was the home to Ludwig Manufacturing in the 60s and 70s, Slingerland through the entirety of just about the entirety of the company, and Camco for a portion of the company's history. And even Leedy was nearby too. So we have all of this vintage stuff that comes out of the woodwork. And because we're a used shop, we saw so much of it. Milwaukee, we also then had a retailer called Faust Music, which then brought in some of the European drums. So we had particularly like 60s Sonar. We had piles of that stuff over here. And it's like, where, like how?
Yeah, right.
So anyways, what that taught me was everything about what I know about vintage drums now. And then furthermore, we have a huge vintage drum community. So I'm so fortunate that I had an older mentor get me into the Chicago Vintage Drum Show and into that community. And you talk to those folks there, and living encyclopedias about this stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's one guy who knows everything about hardware. There's one guy who knows everything about Ludwig, and one guy who knows everything about this, that, and the other. There's, the cymbal guys who are generally pretty weird. There's all sorts of people at these shows. But it's just to say that, being here is the epicenter of drum making in the 20th century. And so being here now in the wake of that, it was a perfect place for me to cut my teeth on that stuff. And I feel so fortunate for that opportunity, because now, understanding that has informed everything from the marketing efforts that I'm putting into place with different companies, and especially product development. So like I mentioned Franklin drums earlier. So it's like having that vintage knowledge not only helps me in a retail setting, but now I'm able to consult and tell Franklin drums, well, if we're going to develop a proprietary drum shell, why don't we think about what Premier was doing back in the day? Why don't we think about what Slingerland was doing back in the day? And then why don't we try to bring that forward with the manufacturing techniques we know that we can utilize through some of these shell manufacturers? So it's a very niche skill set, but it can be a very, very helpful skill set for someone like me.
Yeah, I think you've just answered the question I was going to ask, which was how did that education inform your other skill sets and things like writing copy for a new product? Like how do you do that with the new skills you've learned?
Honestly, as far as copy is concerned, copy has always come easy to me. And so as far as the drum stuff goes, then it's just really a culmination of, okay, I can talk drums, but I'm a copywriter, so I understand how to talk drums to someone who's never touched a drum before. So it's balancing both of these things and trying to create a piece of copy that's going to be as intriguing to the mom who's buying their kid the first drum set, the intermediate, teenager who's looking for their second or third drum set, or the veteran professional who's, maybe even just buying their drums through the manufacturer at this point. So balancing those stakeholders is the copywriting skill set.
Right.
Understanding the drummer, whether from the retail setting or just the nerd community setting, that just informs the sort of language I can use.
Yeah, because it's not the first time you see some of these huge drum companies that write copy for a product that tells you nothing about it. You know what I mean? Like you see, it's X and Y Z a shell, and like that's all you get. You don't get a tonal quality, you don't get a construction, you just get it's this, which is kind of crazy, because as a retailer, when someone's like, "So what does this do?" and you're like, give me a minute, and you've got to comb through it and dig in and or get in touch with someone who has the information that you don't have, to then make sure you're not telling someone something wrong. It's crazy how they're doing it these days.
I think it can be more difficult for a retailer. And I think that's, again, why kind of, again, something for folks who are in music retail, stateside or otherwise, I think that we need to try to foster these sort of adjacent skill sets to help us get by. And this is something I tell players all the time. I have clients come to me who are like, how the heck do I do this full time? How do I play music full time? And, in that setting, I'm going to tell them, well, I don't just hit drums all day and get paid for it. I am hitting drums to market myself or to do, remote sessions. Well, then I'm going to have other drummers over here who need to use my audio equipment and stuff, and I'm going to get paid just to hit record. And then I'm going to have, these social media management jobs with different little drum companies that I've had in the past. I'm going to have the strategy and the consulting stuff. I'm going to have the copywriting stuff for other companies. And it's just to say that this builds and builds and builds, and that one skill set informs another. And if you're a retail, employee, I think that's just as powerful a thing, because now you can spend your days in the shop and you can really help build those relationships with customers, because you can speak from an authentic place with all that knowledge you gained. And then, you can expand you can expand your role with the company, which was something I did when I was a kid in music retail. I took that copywriting and I put it to work and created different documents that we used around the shop that wound up being used across all the franchises in the States. But, there are other ways to do that too, whether it's, especially nowadays, I was working retail 2008 to 2013, now almost 10 years later, you could help out with video production. You could help out with social media management or strategy, or, fielding some of these questions online that come in. There's plenty of additional work that can be done in a retail setting that can bolster the shop sales and bolster an employee's resume and eventually help them go on to do bigger things. And so that's something I always stress to anyone in music.
Yeah, it's like portfolio career, isn't it? They call it, and it's changing so much as well, because the retail landscape's changing. The way that people shop now, because they haven't been able to go to a store for so long, is shifting. I'm surprised that some brands aren't selling directly now. Especially more of the electronic brands. I thought that would be something that would be picked up a lot sooner. Maybe it's still to come, but because some of them are becoming kind of lifestyle brands almost, in the way that Apple are, so yeah, it's fascinating. The whole thing is bonkers. The whole thing, that the way we buy instruments and stuff now is crazy, and I think it's only going to keep changing, because I think people are only going to want to buy more online, so how do we get to sell your vintage 1965K that needs to be played to someone online, because they don't want to come and get it?
Well, you sell it to an old rich guy who's just buying it to put it in a pile with about 100 other Ks.
Yeah, totally.
That's what you sell it to.
Totally. So one of the kind of great things that led us here was just finding your channel, because it's all kinds of bonkers, man. Your Instagram channel is amazing. There seems to be sort of facets within it, if you understand what I mean. Like, for example, you were doing Phil's Fill for a while, where you would take another song and play the In the Air Tonight Phil. And if you all haven't seen this, it's tremendous, because some of the songs that you just wouldn't expect to hear that fill in, and it works absolutely perfectly. So how is that always something you've been conscious of? You put your videos up where you're playing some tunes, you put your videos up where you're doing something very specific, and then you put your videos up where you're just being bonkers.
Yeah, obviously it's a balance, especially with the crazy stuff, right? But
yeah, right.
I don't want people to think I'm too loopy or anything. But for me, first and foremost, I'm making videos to serve myself, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, if you will. And so anytime you're seeing a video on my channel, I always stress this whenever I can, is that you're not seeing some performance. Like, this is my practice time. This filming and the audio stuff is all built into my practice regimen. So whether you're seeing a silly video or anything else, it's that. And so, sometimes I'll have, I mean, there was like a freaking month where I was literally just filming Phil's videos. And it was, it had me smiling and laughing throughout the entire, experience. And it had plenty of other people online smiling and laughing at this stuff. And, it came to a point where I was just like, yeah, I think, after doing 100 of these videos, I think it's okay to put it down and just play music I like again. So, and then I think after the last round of Phil's, I went into like music I loved when I was younger. Just like in the past, there was a time when I was just doing 90s songs
Yeah, I
for a
was watching
long
some of
time.
that earlier. It's great, man.
Yeah,
It
thank
makes me
you.
feel good.
Yeah,
Because I'm that age, man. I'm 40, so that was like huge for me, you know.
and that's the stuff that I grew up on, that my dad had on cassette tape
Mm-hmm,
back then,
mm-hmm,
you
mm-hmm.
know. And but then it's the stories that go along with it. So for me, I'll take these practice things, and then copy comes right in. You know, the last couple of days, if you've seen my posts, there was one about me when I was playing death metal when I was a
Mm-hmm, I
kid,
saw
and then
it,
there was one yesterday where I was talking about vintage Japanese drums and the merit of those products.
mm-hmm.
And so yeah, I guess for me the biggest thing with this channel is A, it's just me having fun, and B, you know, the balance just kind of comes with it, and where my interest lies at the moment.
Totally. Is that something that you stress for other people? Because I think one of the great things about it is it's authentic, right? It's not
Yeah.
contrived. It's not made up or contrived.
Well, I talk about that with a bunch of my students, and I've talked about that on other podcasts all the time, this authenticity thing. Like, I mean, I think about, and I've talked about this on 1,000 podcasts, but I'll talk about it until the day I die, is that, you know, you go on sites like Instagram, and there are still hundreds or thousands of drummers that are going on there and just playing chops and with a straight face, and, you know, no personality. And it's like, what is the merit of this? And are you really enjoying making this video content?
Yeah, totally.
You know, whereas you come on my channel and I'm playing the songs I like, I'm making silly drum videos. Oh, and then I'm reviewing like candy bars from Lithuania or something, you know, like it's more fun. And I think it does show this authentic version of myself. And I think that's so important, because whether you're a player or a consultant or a retailer or a manufacturer, people aren't buying into just the product.
No.
They're buying into the brand and the people behind that brand. So that's why, you know, especially moving forward, you know, the longer time goes on, I think the more people are going to want to connect with other people, even in their purchasing decisions. And so bigger corporations are going to have to start to figure out how they humanize what they're doing in their operations.
Absolutely. I agree 100%. Does it make, if you get called for a session, which Tim did he expect to turn up, though?
It depends.
Do you know what I mean?
It depends. I mean, dude, I've had sessions where it's like, hey, man, can you do a modern country session? Fine. And then I'm going to sit there for 16 hours over 2 days recording the kicks and then the snares all separate, and then the tom separate, and then the hat separate, and then the cymbals. You know, okay, that's not Timbo. But then I'll have the same client call me up and say, hey, man, I have this like big anthemic rock thing. Just do what you do. Do the Timbo thing over it.
Yeah.
And so it is really dependent on the session, on the client. But, you know, I try to be very clear in my communication so that I'm not wasting my time and I'm not wasting their time.
Yeah. So you've done a bunch of stuff for some pretty big names, you know, Disney, 21st Century. How does all that stuff go for you, man? Is it much like you talked about? Is it the remote guy, or are you going into the studio, or what's going on?
I think just about, I've done a few sessions out of the house, but 98% of it was in my mom's basement. So, you know, like, there's something about that room, dude. It's
Really?
A good basement, good cave. So, you know, it all spiraled. You know, I've talked about this before, but basically it's that, you know, I had a guy reach out to me on Instagram, and he had seen some of my videos. This was in 2016. And he said, hey, I love what you're doing. Love your drum sounds. Have you done remote session work? And I lied my pants off and I said, oh yeah, I've done that before, knowing I was ready to take the job. And so he threw me some work doing the soundtrack music for a slot machine.
Wow.
So that spiraled into doing video game soundtracks, spiraled into doing TV series and Disney shows and movie soundtracks, all from this same client. And then, you know, I've had a few other really big clients who have reached out again, just through social media. There was one who reached out, the one I was talking about with the country song and then the Timbo thing. That dude, he works with Warner Canada. He's a producer for Warner Canada. And he found me through my TikTok. No one looks at my freaking TikTok. So that was wild to have him reach out through there. That was crazy.
Yeah. Your cave looks like it has a collection of amazing drums, man. Has it always been Ludwig that you play? Because I see you're playing, is it a classic maple you're on in Cadillac Green?
Yeah. So that's a Heritage Green classic.
The Heritage Green, sorry. Yep.
Yeah. And I always say this, Carter McLean, God bless you. I love you. But I had that color before Carter. And but yeah, a lot of Ludwig. You know why? It's just because it works. It works for me.
Mm-hmm.
There's a family connection. My dad's brother, my uncle, who was the guy who got me my first drum set, my grandparents bought him a Ludwig when he was a kid. He still has it. And then when he was a weekend warrior in the 70s and 80s, he bought an Octoplus, with 8 concert toms and the double kicks and the whole bit that he played out for years. So, there is that connection too. They're great drums. And the classic maple I really love because they're easily modifiable. I putzed with the bearing edge, taking off some, oh gosh darn, what's that word? The gaskets on some of the toms, and then putzing with the hoops, and obviously, heads and everything else. So it's like everything is done to spec to make sure that it projects my voice. And I love that kit. I'm going to the grave with those drums. And beyond that, then, I've been so fortunate to connect with a bunch of boutique manufacturers. I've got a Franklin drum kit coming soon. I have what else do I have? Firehouse drums. I've been working with Eric over there. I'll have some of those in the basement sooner than later. Obviously, I have my Sugar percussion snare drums from Jefferson, which are amazing. I got all sorts of stuff. Jenkins Martin. I got a lot of Jenkins Martin drums in the basement right now. Scott makes Blamir, which is the spun fiberglass shells. Right. Very, very cool stuff. But again, so many of those drums are either I'm borrowing them for free from the manufacturer, or the manufacturer's giving them to me for free, and then I have to find room for them in my freaking basement. But it's a good thing.
It's not a bad problem to have at all.
No.
What do you think boutique drums like that will give you over like off the shelf higher branded drums?
For me, the difference is being able to fully customize something. With the Franklin deal, what I really love about that situation is here's a product where I helped inform the badge, the logo look and feel. I helped inform the shell and what that was going to look like. I had informed literally the finish. We wanted to go with something that looked like the Ludwig standard drums when they made Lemon Strata, if you're familiar with that color at all. And we tried going through Del Mar to make that happen. Del Mar gave us the old, well, you got to buy 100 sheets of it. And I thought, well, we're not spending 10, 15 grand on 100 sheets of wrap. So we wound up doing it in paint. So we had a really, really talented paint guy do this. And then from there, I informed obviously all the sizes, lug counts, bearing edge and everything else. So when I'm getting that drum in my house, all those drums, every piece of it from the bottom up is informed by my tastes and my preferences. And I know exactly what they're going to do because, even with the snare drum was the first to be assembled. It's a 14x4, 8 lug with offset beaver tail lugs. So the tension is very similar to what you'd find on a 60s Ludwig downbeat 14x4 snare. And that drum, when they put it together, sounded exactly what I thought it was going to sound like. And so I expect the rest of these drums to do exactly what I want them and need them to do. And they'll be a great tool for me, whether I'm doing sessions or gigs out on the town or anything else.
Do you get to be privy to the actual production process? Do you get to go see it be done? Or
I got pictures at every step of the process here. They're about a 6-hour drive from me, so I'm not, I'm not hauling up there all the time. But it's nice to get the pictures and like I said, I've been a part of helping inform the way that this brand has been built from the ground up. So it's been really cool.
Yeah, it's a funny old thing, the vintage argument. We have chats with customers about it fairly regularly about what's better, vintage or modern. I think I've always been a bigger fan of modern drums. I've had some older drums kind of just not fall apart, but they've not been usable hardware especially. But I think brands are getting so much better at creating that. I don't know if you've seen play the Sonar Vintage Series kit that came out, which is a great set of drums, because it's a vintage made the way they did it, but the hardware just works.
Well, that's the benefit, right? That's where it comes in, is the hardware. So it's you don't have tension rods that are squeaking when you're tuning them up. You don't have floor tom leg brackets or spur brackets that are failing in the middle of a gig. That's the big. You have a shell with structural integrity good enough generally that you can have your singer stand on it with a beer or whatever he's doing during the show. So that's the big benefit of a lot of these drums, and that's the big thing about Franklin. That was the whole vision for a lot of that stuff. So, and I totally get it with the Sonar. Sonar makes an incredible drum. Even some of these other modern manufacturers, in the vein of like the Pearl Tama Yamaha thing with these harder woods and stuff. It's obviously it's a different sound, but it's still something that's very usable. And obviously the big factor with all those three brands and the products they're doing is just that durability.
Yeah, and their whole thing is resonance, right? All these sort of modern drums want the drum to be as resonant as it possibly can be. All the R&D that goes into it is how finely the bearing edge can be cut, all of that. What kind of wood will give you more resonance, more sustain, more of that, Whereas I think the vintage thing is going the other way. It's trying to tail off as much resonance as possible. I think the brands that have the heritage, your Ludwig, Gretsch and Sonar are really the brands that are going to nail it, because they've got that, like Zildjian, the over century long drum kit building history, so they can create those kind of sounds really simply.
I mean, Ludwig's still using the same shell machines that they were using in the 60s back in Chicago. So that's going to help make that happen. I would say, though, that with modern drums, some of the appeal to some players is the fact that they don't come with, worlds of resonance or whatever. But for me, I've got a really great 4th generation carpenter up in Milwaukee that does a bunch of work on my drums, because I want my vintage drums to do everything that a modern drum can do. So what I'll do is I'll bring them up there, and I think resonance is often affected because this wood over 50, 60 plus years is going to start to move a little bit, and then the drums get out of round. That's the biggest problem we have with Gretsch drums more than any other brand. And so my buddy up there will true the bearing edges. We keep that original profile of the edge in place, but we massage it in such a way that a drum head's going to sit a heck of a lot better on there. And then we should get just as much a modern resonance. But what we're trying to do is use those bearing edges, the vintage bearing edges that have a heck of a lot more contact between the head and the wood, and let that old, dry, beautiful wood sing much more than the head is singing as far as what's informing the drum sounds. So while some people just like this, kind of old, crappy drum, there is another path towards, even though you're not going to have the best hardware. I hate frickin' 60s Ludwig spurs. They're the worst. Yeah. But you can still achieve tones with those drums that rival modern drums, and often can beat those modern drums in a studio setting.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, I don't have the experience where I've A/B'd them to any great extent. I will say head companies are doing lots of great work trying to make sure that heads sit on these drums much truer. Slightly widen the collars, that kind of thing, just to make life a little bit easier for people. Oh, totally. We were nerding out about, drumhead companies doing a lot more to make vintage and older drums much more usable, as opposed to like trying to crowbar a head on to the drum, I mean, the first step to that was obviously Evans 360, right? I mean, that was years ago now that came out. And that was such a great tool for anyone with a vintage drum. And since then, I am so appreciative that Remo came out with those classic fit heads too. Yeah. Because those are awesome. Yeah. Now I think what would be cool is to see them expand that line. What I would really like to see is a classic fit, what do they call that? The vintage ambassador. Yeah. So it's that, different type of plastic or whatever. I think it's a polyester versus a polypropylene or something like that. Yeah, and it's a single ply, 2-ply guy. Right. Where there's a hazy on the bottom. So Remo, if you're listening, classic vintage heads, Heck, do it in Emperors as well. Just let's go the whole hog, you know. Let's go the whole hog.
100%.
What about cymbals, man? Do you do the vintage cymbal thing, or are you a modern cymbal guy?
You know, for me, cymbals are a little bit different because they break.
Yeah, right. Right.
So I like something with a warranty. You know, when I'm spending $700 on a cymbal, well, I'd like to have a little bit more than a year worth of use out of it. So yeah, I like going new on that end of things. I'm fortunate to be able to work through Zildjian when I need cymbals through them. And I work with a few other brands too. So that makes that super easy. And what I like about modern cymbals too is that you have a heck of a lot more choice.
Mm-hmm.
You know, obviously we have our classic brands, Sabian, Zildjian, and the like. But now you have some of these other players, especially the smaller ones. I love Cymbal and Gong, which is a company out of Portland.
Mm-hmm.
One dude who just has these cymbals made. Great cymbals. He does Istanbul K copies. He does cymbals in the vein of like Ringo's set from the Ed Sullivan Show. You know, anything you can imagine from a vintage setting, he's recreating now, and they're all just so cool. And then a little bit bigger than that, obviously Agup. Istanbul Agup has been making some really interesting cymbals for players in my vein. So that's what I really love about being able to buy cymbals today versus being a vintage guy. I'm not paying $2,000 for a freaking Istanbul K ride. All right.
No, and listen, man, you got to go through a crate of them to find out which one is the good one, right? So the difference now between, God, even in the sort of 15 years the shop's been here, the way that cymbals are being made and the trends that have changed, and you didn't have dry cymbals like you do now in the same way by any stretch of the imagination. You know, that's become a massive thing these days. You know, brands like Mino, the interview that just dropped actually that we recorded was from a guy called Norbert, who's the A&R for Mino, and just listening to their manufacturing process and some of that stuff's amazing. You know, one of the first major brands to keep using Turkey that weren't a Turkish brand. You know, just let's go and do this properly at the home of cymbal making. You know, it's pretty amazing.
I think Mino came out of Durit. What is it? Durit Mural? Didn't that come out of that?
No,
their manufacturing or whatever, or was it always Mino?
Yeah, it was always Mino. Certainly, the understanding I have it was started by Roland Mino, basically in his basement. He came home after the war and was a traveling salesman, and he always knew how to make musical instruments. And then him and his wife started making cymbals somehow. I don't know if they were buying the metal, I don't know what they were doing, but maybe the factory that they have in Turkey was from there. Who knows?
Maybe there was a connection there at some point. I feel like I read that somewhere. But that's again, the fact that we have a German company that's making, I guess you could say distributing. I guess they have dedicated factories, so manufacturing, world class Turkish cymbals is at scale. That's the other thing, at scale.
Yeah.
Meinl is one of the top 3 cymbal companies now.
Amazing. Just amazing.
Crazy.
And it's very German of them to be like, well, we're going to do this, we'll do it properly, and that we'll find a factory in Turkey and we'll do it how it should be done. Got to respect that. Got to love that. Oh, so you're into drum history, right?
What's that?
You're into drum history?
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
So, let's how did that come around? Because not everybody's into drum history, man. Not everybody loves it. Some guys just want to play.
I hate history. I've always hated history when I was in school. I think in college, one of the only B- I ever got was in a freaking history class that I had to take. But I think because I have the interest in drums, the interest in it being such a locally focused thing with Chicago being here and then the drum show, and then an interest in creating how to create different types of drum sounds.
Mm-hmm.
It just kept me on track with just diving more and more into that. Having that retail background, I'd have old beach premieres come in. I'd have vintage beach sonars come in, or all sorts of the old Ludwig Slingerlands and all the regular stuff too. And I would be able to touch these drums and tune these drums and rehead these drums. And really start to understand, oh, okay, so, you know, an old Yamaha recording custom might sound appropriate for a certain setting because I was able to touch sets and sets and sets and sets of those things back when they were worth nothing. They should have bought one. And, you know, and then I would have a bunch of Ludwigs that would come in and I'd tune those up, rehead them, whatever, hit them. And it's like, oh, okay, here's the difference between these two very different vintage drums. And, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I guess that's all it was just being a nerd about tone more than anything.
Do you think it helps that it's effectively an American instrument? And there's we had a really interesting guy on the podcast before who talks. His whole thing is he's a drum historian. Well, he's actually a music historian, but his thesis or his book that he wrote was basically traces the evolution of popular music through the drum set, and it's tremendously fascinating.
I don't know if it's because it's, you know, sort of U.S. centric, but the older I get, the more I get more interested in the stuff that wasn't built in the U.S. Penguin out of, you know, Brazil, or like obviously Premier, love the old Beverly stuff. I really love like the old Heyman stuff.
Yeah.
Woo!
Yeah, it's great. I used to have one when I was a kid.
They're great.
Yeah, I had a Heyman when I was a kid. Talk about floor tom brackets, that the drum would fall down because it wouldn't hold the wing nuts wouldn't hold the legs in place, you know. But it had the original heads on it. It still had the lever dampeners on it. Great drum set, you know.
All those drums, and when you get into Europe too, you know what's so cool is seeing some of the old Italian drums, some of the old French drums, obviously the German drums and stuff like that. It's just like such a different world. And again, whether it's influencing my sound aesthetic or my visual aesthetic, because a lot of those European companies had freaking kooky finishes that were, you know, all their own and amazing. And the lugs too. Like I love a lot of those old Beverly lugs, just gorgeous stuff. Yeah. And so, you know, it continues to inform everything that I do on a daily basis.
Yeah, totally. I can imagine it will, especially if you're doing a lot of recording. If you're doing a lot of recording. So are you at the stage now where if a session comes through and they want a specific vibe, you know exactly where to go?
100%.
Amazing.
Yeah.
It's like, that's the dream, right? To be able to just, like, I just know exactly what's going to work. Can you do it for other rooms? Like, can you walk in a room and be like, I know it would sound great in here?
Not just that, yeah, but that's actually a service that I offer.
Oh, wow.
I'll go into studios and they'll be like, how do I get cool drum tones? And I'll say, all right, let's start with the drums, and we'll beforehand I'll tell them, they'll tell me what drums they have and cymbals they have, and I'll say, all right, we're going to get these heads and these wires and this, that, and the other, these doodads, and then I'll get in the studio and put that together, knowing they're, you know, the rest of the technical stuff of the audio gear. Then I'll say, all right, we're going to plug these certain mics in and use them in this position and plug them into whatever preamps. And from there, I'll get in the room and I will start to move the mics. I'll start running around and talking and clapping and stuff, trying to get an understanding for the aesthetic of the studio. Most recently, I did one in just north of Chicago, and I was in this guy's studio, and he really wanted to try to get a bigger room sound out of his smaller space. And he was in a basement. And so there was the live room and there was a door, and you would go through the door and that would lead directly to the stairwell. And I asked him, had you tried putting like a room mic in that stairwell? And he said, yeah, but there's some funky resonance issues, and you could hear it when you walk up the stairwell. But when you got above a certain point in the stairwell, the ceiling just like jutted up. And I went up there and I'm like kind of clapping and talking in the space right there where it opened up. And I thought, this is where the mic needs to go. So we took the 5 minutes, put the mic right there. And sure enough, from tuning these drums to now placing these mics exactly where they needed to be, I got them exactly where he wanted to go tone wise. So having that understanding of what drums are going to do what things sonically and what heads and accessories like wires are going to make a difference in that effort. And then understanding what microphones are going to produce what sounds with those drums, and understanding where those microphones should go to produce the sounds that the producer, engineer, studio owner want. It's an amazing skill set. If there's a niche skill set, that's about the most niche skill set I've got. But I love it because it's so rewarding. Because, with this last guy I went and helped out, he was just like, oh, I never would have thought to put a mic there. I never would have thought to do this with that drum or to, do this mix trick or whatever. And, I left there knowing that he was going to be able to achieve all the drum tones he's ever wanted to produce in that studio.
That's
so
amazing.
That's totally rewarding.
Like, how did you learn all that though? Like, like the mics and all that. Is that just trial and error, or is it something you've always been into, nerding out on tech gear and things like that?
I got my basis in recording from a guy I was in a band with in the mid 2010s, and I've been recording since I was 13.
Right.
I got a 4-track back then, which then turned into at 15. Me and a buddy of mine built out a studio in his basement. Even to the point where the guy who built my buddy's deck out in his backyard, and then the guy who built the deck for the pool we had in my backyard here as a kid, we hit him up as Mr. Gehring, and we said, Mr. Gehring, we're trying to build a recording studio. We don't know what the heck we're doing. We need a wall so we can have, a room for the computer and a room for the drums. And he said, listen, I got this double pane window. I'll help you guys do this whole thing. We built a freaking wall.
Wow.
And we did it proper, dude. And from there, we built a homemade sub kick. I remember that we had a bunch of cheap mics, and then we built a homemade sub kick out of 2x4s. And a freaking 15-inch speaker. It was stupid. But again, it was, I was learning then, and that continued it really blossomed, about, I guess it would have been 2013, 2014. And, it's just continuing to dial in those sounds. So much of it is trial and error. And I feel very fortunate that I worked a job for a long time that allowed me to spend a lot of money on equipment, mics and cables and interfaces and computers, so that now I can get a really professional sound out of my really cheap basement.
Yeah.
And I can go into any environment and replicate what I do while getting the personality out of whatever room I'm in. When I quit my corporate job in 2019, I was driving around the States for 4 or 5 months. And I was in Portland for a big chunk of time, Portland, Oregon. And I was staying in the basement of Jake Endicott, who manages Revival Drum Shop. Jake is a saint for letting me stay there in his basement. And came up that a guy in California wanted me to do 5 or 6 songs for his EP or whatever. I said, no problem. I had to quote him high because I had to ship a bunch of equipment out to frickin' Portland so I could record this stuff. So I had the equipment shipped out, and Jake let me use he's got a beautiful set of clear maple interior Ludwigs in black lacquer. Amazing drums. So I'm using his drums. I got my cymbals. I got my recording stuff. And I had to figure out, this guy wanted like a big 90s rock thing, like a Seattle type of sound. And I'm in a carpeted basement. And so I thought, what the heck am I going to do? And it was kind of a C shape. So at the bottom of the C was this bedroom where I was staying. It was also doubled as the drum room. And then up the curve of the C was this sort of hallway area in the basement. And at the top of the C was a fully tiled bathroom. And I thought, I put an AKG 414 in Omni, I think, in that bathroom for my room mic, and had all my close mics too. And I'll tell you, as stupid as that sounds, that was one of the coolest room sounds I have ever had. And it was just because I was like, well, this could do something interesting. And it's just like with technology. If you're teaching your mom how to text you back on her her new smartphone, she's not going to break it. You have to tell your parents, you're not going to break the freaking phone. Just keep trying until you get it right. And recording's the same way. You're not going to break a microphone by putting it a certain place or whatever. Your tone isn't, maybe it sucks, maybe it doesn't, but you're not going to break anything. So just trying these things, putting the what ifs into reality, it's worth it. It's how I achieve my drum tone. It's how I've learned what works and what doesn't. And, now here in 2021, is it 2021? I think it's 2021.
For a little bit longer, yeah.
Close enough. And, here in 2021, I can confidently go into any space now with this knowledge base that I've built and get a cool drum sound.
Yeah. So I think so many people don't realize as well that it's about context, and they want a kind of one size fits all. Let's just how do we get a cool drum sound? Well, what does that even mean? What is the song you're playing? So on and so forth. Because a cool drum sound for one song is not going to make a cool drum sound for something like Bonham and Bjork. They're going to be different things. You're not going to put those two worlds, unless that's a conscious choice. You're not really going to put those two worlds together, I don't think, anyway. You know what I mean?
I hope not, yeah.
So, man, it's been really great. Thank you so much for coming on and chatting through. What's coming up next for you? What have you got going on that people can find out about? Or I think are you teaching again?
I am. So happy December. and let me tell you guys, I am now partnering with Big Fat Snare Drum as the official educator of Big Fat Snare Drum. So if you want to book a lesson on how I play my chops, or how I do my recordings, or how to optimize, your recordings or your social media, that is the thing that I'm doing now. It can all be booked through bigfatsnaredrum.com, or you can always DM me on Instagram. Happy to do that. So that's going to be the big thing here at the end of the year, and we'll see what the new year brings. I thank you so much for having me on the podcast.
Sorry to interrupt. We'll make sure that wherever your socials are, we can list them and people can get a hold of those things as well,
I appreciate it. Yeah. Timbo from Keno or Timbo from Kenosha on all platforms. You can find my links at timbaltes.com, TIMBALTES.com. And that's about it. Drummers Only, such a cool company. And I've known Adam for a long time through the internet. Yeah. And so good to finally connect with you. And thank you guif for having me on the pod.
No worries, man. If you ever find yourself, for whatever reason, in Glasgow, the door's always open, the coffee's always on, man. So just please do. If we end up in Chicago, we'll come hit you up, say hello.
Pizza's on me then.
All right. Nice one, Tim. Appreciate it, man. You take care.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Drummers Only Radio.
You can find us online at www.drummersonly.co.uk.
Drop us a line. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter at Drummers Only UK.
Make sure you subscribe to the podcast. We're on Apple, Spotify and YouTube.
Any questions? info@drummersonly.co.uk is the email, or if you need leads, it's leads@drummersonly.co.uk.
Thanks again for listening,
and we'll see you next time.